This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. Let's talk about our main event. It's John Cena and Wade Barrett. It's a chairs match, and it's going to come off like a Nexus blow-off, according to the Observer. Excuse me. Wade is going to lose in 19 minutes and 8 seconds. I do want to mention CM Punk is brought out to announce in place of Matt Striker, and Barrett's going to keep trying to hit Cena with a chair, but Cena's going to move, and Barrett hits the announcer's table, and then the post. A third miss saw him hit the steps. The fans are booing. It's probably a 70-30 pro Cena crowd. But the match has a lot of heat. 3.25 stars is the rating. We should mention he's going to set up 6 chairs in the ring and use the attitude adjustment on the chairs and get the pin. Barrett's crawling out of the ring and wants to leave, but Cena's going to follow him, give him 2 more hard chair shots to the back. And as he's laying there, Cena rolls the cart on top of him and then pulls down a chair hung with a rope with a dozen or 2 chairs, which all tumble down the cart. Of course, Barrett's completely safe, but Meltzer says it made for a very cool visual. This feels like a blow off, and we've talked about it for a lot this year. It shouldn't have been blown off this quickly. This still had some steam on it. What'd you think watching it back?
Yeah, same thing. Now, was the gag impressive? All those chairs falling? Yeah. But still, it's like a buried alive match with The Undertaker. Once the guy's buried, that's the end of the angle, isn't it?
Yep.
It has some finality to it. This had so much legs, you know. Where were all his guys when all this was going down? In the chair match and no DQ?
Yes.
They could have came down with no reprisal, no rebuttal. Referee couldn't have done a thing about it. See, we just skip over stuff thinking the audience is not going to think that way. Well, you know, they'll just appreciate the physicality and the characters are over and all that. No, they're not. When you have a no DQ match and you've got a band of cutthroats and it is something as important as fighting John Cena in the main event, if you're Wade Barrett, you put out every fail safe you can put out there in every clever way possible to assure yourself of a win. And that translates to heat. They just, you know, for some reason, the mentality is leave them happy. Well, you know what? If you're doing a pay-per-view every month, you don't have to leave them happy every single pay-per-view at the end of the night, because 3 weeks later, you can bring it back. You don't have to give it to them then. You can bring it back 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, and stringing it out and stringing your story out is what makes for good TV, my opinion.
What do you think about the world title not ending the show? I mean, clearly Cena is the face that runs the place, or whatever the cliche is, but you had back-to-back title matches, you know, in matches 5 and 6. And then you've got Cena closing the show without the world title there. I guess the thinking is he's our franchise. He's our Hulk Hogan. He's our main event with or without the belt. And we want to send fans home happy. Is that pretty much the thinking, do you think?
Yeah. Give the guy that draws the kids and sells the merchandise, leave them happy. Have John have his comeuppance. It was just about 6 months too soon.
Meltzer would recap the whole show and he would put it over and say it was a good show. But then he would say, the question becomes, what next with Nexus? On the TLC show, Cena laid out every member with chair shots except David Otunga, who it was said he was injured at Raw. Earlier in the show, Justin Gabriel, Heath Slater, and Michael McGillicuddy were shown writhing in pain on the floor in the locker room with the idea Cena had laid them all out. Later, before the main event, he laid out Husky Harris. And then he finished Barrett with an attitude adjustment on chairs. After the match and the shot replayed like crazy, he put Barrett underneath the cart and then pulled down a series of flying chairs. He said 24. And Nexus was kept off of Raw and SmackDown. Boy, you made the analogy earlier that Cena would become Godzilla. Dude, this is a Godzilla-like pay-per-view for John Cena here, is it not?
Oh, you know what that is?
No.
Regurgitation.
Yeah.
Too much. Unbelievable. No S on his chest. Odds were too great. Too many opportunities. It just went against everything reasonable. Any reasonable person would have told you, well, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why couldn't you have done this? It just, for me, it just was too much. And it was the thing we talked about earlier. It's just shoving somebody to the point of where it's to their detriment. And I think it was.
You know that this is too much and, blah, blah, blah. Is there an opportunity for you to go communicate that to someone, or would that just fall on deaf ears and it's a waste of breath?
Deaf ears.
When you go talk to Cena about this, cause I know you're his agent, are you trying to give him some old school pro tips on, listen, here's what we might could do here? Or is that not your marching order? And you know that in the end, that's probably going to bite you in the butt.
I never failed to give John my honest opinion on everything right up until the last time I worked with him. And he will tell you that. If he tells the truth, I always, and a lot of things I would see him go, wow, I didn't think of that. But the old man is already dead set on doing this.
Yeah.
Kabosh. I never failed to tell him what I thought and when something was too much. And I think we're making a mistake here. And if it was already settled and it was already been discussed, I had very, very little control over that. As the years crept by, less and less, John took more control of what, he felt he should do in his angles. And 9 times out of 10, Vince would just go right along with him. And that's, I understand he's selling a lot of merchandise.
Right.
Even when business is down, most of them are there to see John. So I get that whole thing. But I think you could have spread some of that, wealth around and got some of these heels with some heat on them and let, hey, let's take a John Morrison and some of those guys and up their game and up their positioning on some of these shows. Not have to put all the burden on Cena.
When you hear creative, take me through production, I guess, cause I don't really know what your spot looked like at this era. Are you in the big production meeting before the pay-per-view starts in the back and everybody's sort of going over the creative, or is this something where a runner in a suit and tie brings it to you and says, hey, communicate this with your guys?
No, we have a production meeting before every television and every pay-per-view. And we roughly go through what, where you are on the card, how much time you have, what they're looking for, what are your ideas, and we would discuss. Sometimes if the meeting was running late because it started late for whatever, I don't know what could cause it to start late. I don't know, but we were kind of log jammed in there for time. It would be okay. We'll discuss the Cena thing later, come see me, whatever. Well, then I would just go to John and he would tell me what he had already talked to him about. And I had an idea of which way he wanted to go. Very seldom was there a wholesale change by the time you got to the pay-per-view of what they got there with that day on John's match. It had been talked about for a week or two. And I would give him my opinions and why, and talk it over, especially when he was working with Randy. I had a great rapport with Randy. And, those two guys were very receptive to ideas. It just, that was it. And when you left that meeting, sometimes you could get back in to see Vince. Sometimes you would sit there for an hour outside of his office waiting to get in and see him, and time would run out. The show would start. So it was, John pretty much had carte blanche over his deal. That made my job simpler in some ways and harder in others.
tons and tons and tons of questions about the Wade Barrett thing. And they all pretty much look like this. Zach wants to know, whose decision was it to bury Wade Barrett quite literally under a massive pile of chairs? It felt like it took a while for people to take him seriously again after that one. And I do think he brings up a good point, Arn. I mean, I can't believe we don't have a cut his water off t-shirt yet. Cause that's something you say and I love, and our fans love it, but they cut his water off, and yeah, we would, try this other different, I'm afraid I've got some bad news. And you tried a few different things with Wade, but he was already here. He's already a made guy. He's already in the main event with John Cena, but it does take a while for fans to take him seriously again. And you got to think a lot of that is based on the weeks leading up to this show, but specifically this show. In hindsight, how bad of a deal was this for Wade?
It was bad for all of them. Instead of looking like a synchronized unit of young studs that were on the way up, they looked like Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
And one man was destroying the whole unit. It takes a while to, number one, all those chairs falling on him. Why ain't he in the hospital? Number one, if we're talking reality base, Wade Barrett. And why would you put a guy, I got an idea. How about we use the numbers and screw Cena? Why don't we drag him back to the back? And why don't Wade dump all the chairs on John?
I mean, that makes sense.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Leave John off another greater period of time and have Wade and his guys just come out and just dominate. Couple of matches on every show, dominate. And Wade is wielding the power. This is not rocket science. It doesn't take, that big a deal. Here comes an ambulance in. My God, John had 40 chairs dropped on him. He's on his way to the hospital. Now you walk away from something like that on what is designed to be a violent show where weapons are legal. Your top babyface just got thumped as a result of it. Next time you have a TLC match, there's jeopardy now. Oh, that's where Cena got took to the hospital. Very few people are going to remember Wade Barrett getting buried under there because it was just an exclamation point on a foregone conclusion that Nexus with 7 or 8 members could not take down Godzilla that night. And it's not plausible.
It's pretty remarkable that this story comes to an end like this. We had some other questions in here that I think we already know the answer to. Jeremy writes, in my opinion, WWE should have kept TLC a match and not a pay-per-view. I feel like that destroyed the importance of the match. What say you?
Jeremy, you're a smart man. And you're right. I think one TLC match could have headlined the pay-per-view, let everything else be regular matches with just regular stipulations, and it would have kept that match fresh. You only have one a year, and it's special. Just like when you had sometimes like Hell in the Cell, you wouldn't even have one a year. It'd be several years before you had one. It made it mean something, and that's the key to everything we do. People don't care about something unless it has some meaning to it. And TLC was about when it was done with the right guys and given the right build. It's something spectacular. That's for sure. And I agree with you, Jeremy, 100%.
Kurt wants to know, how hard is it as an agent to put together one of these gimmick matches when you know there are at least 3 others that will use similar weapons and ideas? That is something you and I haven't talked about before. Sure, you're going to be heavily involved in this one match, but man, there's a lot of other action on the card that has similar stipulations. So it does stand to reason that you might need to talk to those guys a little bit, huh?
Guess what Arn did then in the afternoon?
Made the rounds.
Took his notepad around and said, what are you guys doing? Went to the next match. What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And if there was a conflict, I would try to get it resolved with the producer, talent. And if we had to go to the boss, we did. And fact is, repetition it's like high spots today. If you do the same thing, if you're crawling up a ladder, two guys, and the third guy, the ladder's in the middle of the ring, and he tips that ladder over and both guys straddle the top rope, it's something spectacular. But if you did that 2 matches later, there's a pretty good chance that second time you're going to get a lot less of a reaction, because I've seen it. So it was very important on days like that to not have any repeat spots.
It's got to be challenging. One last one, then we'll wrap things up here. I love this because this is our audience, baby. Fernando wants to know, would Arn Anderson rather participate in a TLC match, have a cheeseburger meal, extra cheese, or a 30-minute Iron Man match with the Renegade?
I've always liked cheese. My favorite.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.